The Emperor at his peak. Picture Napoleon Bonaparte on December 2nd, 1804, standing before the altar of Notre Dame Cathedral. Pope Pius VII watches as Napoleon takes the crown from his hands and places it on his own head. The symbolism cuts through the ceremony like a blade. This man answers to no earthly authority. At 35 years old, he has crowned himself Emperor of the French, master of an empire that stretches from Spain to Poland. His presence fills the cathedral. Short in stature but enormous in command, Napoleon radiates the kind of power that bends nations to his will. This is a body built for conquest, sustained by an almost supernatural energy that allows him to function on 2 hours of sleep while commanding armies across frozen Russian steppes. His gray eyes scan rooms like a general surveying battlefields, his hands moving with surgical precision as he traces battle plans across maps of Europe. Napoleon's legendary stamina becomes the stuff of military folklore. His officers struggle to match his pace during 18-hour strategy sessions. He reviews troop positions at dawn, rides 12 miles to inspect supply lines, returns to dictate correspondence until midnight, then rises before sunrise to repeat the cycle. His secretary struggles to keep up with the torrent of orders, letters, and decrees that pour from the emperor's mind. This is a machine of human ambition operating at maximum capacity. But machines break down. The first cracks in Napoleon's physical armor appear as early as 1802, when he was just 33 years old, though his inner circle dismisses them as the natural toll of commanding an empire. According to medical records kept by his personal physician, severe stomach attacks began during this period, with episodes of collapse and vomiting that would worsen throughout the following decade. During later campaigns against Prussia, his valet notes the emperor clutching his stomach after meals. The pain doubles him over for minutes at a time, his face turning pale as he grips the edge of tables for support. When questioned, Napoleon waves away concerns with irritation that seems disproportionate to simple exhaustion. Contemporary medical notes document the onset of debilitating headaches around the same time. Witnesses describe Napoleon pressing his palms against his temples during crucial meetings with foreign ministers. The migraines strike without warning, forcing him to retreat to darkened rooms where he lies motionless for hours. His personal physician attributes these episodes to the stress of leadership, but privately records their increasing frequency in his medical journal. The entries reveal a disturbing pattern. The attacks coincide with Napoleon's most important military decisions. Court physicians and kitchen staff begin documenting changes in his legendary appetite that alarm those closest to him. The emperor, who once devoured meals in minutes, now picks at his food, pushing plates away half-finished. Kitchen staff report that he sends back dishes untouched, complaining of nausea that strikes at random moments. His digestion becomes erratic, periods of normal eating followed by days when he can barely keep down water. The imperial tailor begins to notice weight fluctuations that require constant adjustments to the emperor's uniforms. Medical observers note that Napoleon's famous irritability, once directed at incompetent subordinates, now flares at minor inconveniences. Servants learn to approach him with caution during these moods as he lashes out at the slightest provocation. His longtime secretary observes that the emperor's patience, once infinite during complex negotiations, evaporates over trivial matters. The man who could charm kings and intimidate generals becomes unpredictable in his reactions to daily interactions. The emperor's inner circle begins to exchange worried glances during private moments. Marshals who have served with him for years notice subtle changes in his decision-making process. Napoleon still displays tactical brilliance, but the lightning-quick assessments that made him legendary now require longer periods of concentration. He asks for battle reports to be repeated, claiming distraction rather than admitting any decline in his mental faculties. During the 1809 Austrian campaign, Napoleon experiences his first serious medical crisis that his doctors work frantically to conceal from history. After the Battle of Wagram, witnesses report finding the emperor collapsed in his tent, vomiting blood into a basin held by his personal servant. The episode lasts for over an hour, during which Napoleon remains conscious but unable to speak coherently. His chief physician orders absolute secrecy, threatening court-martial for anyone who discusses the incident. The official medical records from this period contain telling omissions, where detailed health reports should document the emperor's condition. Pages are missing or contain suspiciously vague entries about digestive complaints and nervous exhaustion. These gaps suggest a deliberate effort to hide the severity of Napoleon's declining health from both his enemies and his own government officials. What grows inside Napoleon during these years remains invisible to the medical knowledge of his time. His physicians lack the tools to identify the cellular rebellion that has begun in his digestive system. They cannot see the microscopic warfare being waged in his stomach lining, cannot understand why his body has begun to attack itself with increasing ferocity. The emperor who conquered Europe cannot even conquer the mutiny in his own flesh. The irony becomes clear when you examine the timeline. As Napoleon reaches the height of his political power, his physical power begins its irreversible decline. The body that carried him from Corsican obscurity to European domination now works against him with the same relentless efficiency he once brought to military campaigns. By 1812, during the preparation for the Russian campaign, Napoleon's medical episodes occur with alarming regularity. His personal guard learns to recognize the warning signs: the sudden pallor, the involuntary clutching of his abdomen, the need to excuse himself from meetings without explanation. The emperor who once seemed invincible now fights a daily battle just to maintain the appearance of strength. But the most disturbing question remains unanswered. Physicians recorded these symptoms, but none could identify what was consuming their emperor from within. The gruesome death of Napoleon Bonaparte. The most powerful man in Europe died screaming in his own filth, his body so ravaged by disease that witnesses could barely stand to watch. According to eyewitness accounts and medical records, Napoleon Bonaparte rotted alive for 6 years on a remote island, his flesh bloating, his stomach bleeding, black bile pouring from his mouth in his final moments. The emperor who once commanded millions couldn't even command his own bowels. Tonight, we examine the autopsy reports, physician testimonies, and horrifying physical evidence that reveal competing theories about what killed him. To understand this gruesome end, we must first witness the man at his absolute peak. The Seeds of Decay. The mystery deepens when you examine the competing theories about what was destroying Napoleon from within. Medical historians debate 3 primary hypotheses: stomach cancer, chronic arsenic poisoning, or neurosyphilis, but none can definitively explain the constellation of symptoms that plagued the emperor. The stomach cancer theory suggests a hereditary predisposition, as Napoleon's father died of similar gastric ailments, though this remains one contested explanation among many in the medical literature. Arsenic poisoning from wallpaper pigments and contaminated wine offers another possibility, while some researchers point to neurological infections that could account for his later mental changes. Each theory carries weight, but the symptoms tell a story that transcends simple diagnosis. The earliest documented episodes surfaced during Napoleon's most triumphant campaigns. While he reshapes Europe through military genius, his digestive system begins its rebellion. Campaign records from 1807 describe incidents where Napoleon doubles over in pain during strategy meetings, his hands pressed against his abdomen as waves of agony wash over him. Officers learn to continue discussions while their emperor recovers, pretending not to notice the sweat that beads on his forehead or the way his breathing becomes shallow and rapid. During the Battle of Friedland, witnesses observed Napoleon vomiting blood into a silver basin behind his command tent, yet within hours he emerges to direct the final assault that crushes the Russian army. This pattern of devastating physical weakness followed by tactical brilliance becomes his new reality, and these bleeding episodes will only escalate in the years ahead. His ability to compartmentalize pain becomes another weapon in his arsenal, but one that demands an increasingly heavy toll. His personal physicians document changes that alarm them privately while they maintain public silence. Dr. G. Nicolas Corvisart notes that Napoleon's appetite has become erratic, swinging from periods of normal consumption to days when even water triggers violent nausea. The emperor's famous ability to devour meals in minutes gives way to cautious nibbling, as if his body has become suspicious of all sustenance. Digestion, once automatic, now requires conscious effort and frequently fails entirely. The progression from discomfort to genuine agony unfolds over several years. What begins as occasional stomach cramping evolves into daily episodes that require increasingly strong medications. Napoleon's medicine chest expands to include various opium preparations, each stronger than the last. His doctors experiment with laudanum doses that would incapacitate normal men, yet Napoleon builds tolerance that demands ever higher quantities to achieve relief. The medication brings temporary peace, but clouds his judgment during crucial decisions. Constitutional symptoms emerge alongside the digestive problems. Napoleon's legendary energy begins to wane, leaving him exhausted after even short walks. The man who once rode for days without rest now becomes winded climbing a single flight of stairs. His famous morning inspections of troops grow shorter as walking more than a few hundred yards leaves him gasping for breath. Sleep becomes both refuge and torment. He sleeps longer but wakes less refreshed, his body demanding more rest while providing less recovery. Neurological symptoms consistent with advanced disease or systemic infection begin to manifest. Court records reveal multiple instances where Napoleon collapses during important state meetings. During negotiations with Austrian diplomats in 1809, the emperor suddenly stops mid-sentence, his face draining of color as he grips the edge of the conference table. Within seconds, he crumples to the floor, unconscious before he hits the ornate carpet. His guards carry him to his chambers while ministers scramble to explain his absence as exhaustion from overwork. The physical changes become impossible to hide from those who dress him daily. Napoleon's imperial tailor faces an unprecedented challenge as the emperor's abdomen begins to swell in ways that defy normal weight fluctuation. The distension appears gradually, creating an unnatural bulge that grows more pronounced each month. Uniform modifications become a delicate dance of maintaining imperial dignity while accommodating a body that seems to expand from within. The tailor learns to build extra fabric into waistcoats, disguising the changes through clever design. His digestive system becomes a source of constant unpredictability. Meals that once brought pleasure now carry the threat of immediate consequences. Napoleon develops an aversion to foods he previously enjoyed, his body seemingly rejecting sustenance it once processed without difficulty. The imperial kitchen adapts by preparing increasingly bland offerings, hoping to find something his rebellious stomach will accept. Even these modifications often fail, leaving the emperor malnourished despite access to the finest foods in Europe. The psychological impact weighs heavily on a man accustomed to absolute control. Napoleon's famous temper, previously reserved for military failures or political opposition, now flares at his body's betrayals. He rages against symptoms he cannot command away, becoming increasingly frustrated with limitations that no amount of willpower can overcome. The emperor who conquered nations cannot conquer the rebellion in his own flesh. Medical consultations become more frequent and desperate as traditional treatments prove ineffective. Napoleon's physicians try bloodletting, purging, special diets, and herbal remedies, but nothing stops the progression of his mysterious illness. Each failed treatment adds to the growing sense that something fundamental has gone wrong inside the emperor's body, something beyond the reach of early 19th century medicine. By 1812, the acceleration becomes undeniable. What had been manageable symptoms transform into daily struggles that require careful management. Napoleon's condition demands increasingly elaborate deceptions to maintain the illusion of imperial strength. The gap between his public image and private reality widens into a chasm that threatens to expose the emperor's vulnerability to enemies who circle like predators sensing weakness. These symptoms followed him into his final campaign, and they would prove more decisive than any opposing army he had ever faced. Waterloo's hidden truth. The morning of June 18, 1815 should have belonged to Napoleon Bonaparte. Instead, eyewitness accounts describe him writhing in his bed at the Caillou farmhouse, doubled over with pain that no amount of willpower can overcome. According to medical reports from his personal staff, his hemorrhoids had flared to excruciating levels, making sitting impossible. Urinary problems forced him to strain over chamber pots while his officers waited outside, pretending not to hear the emperor's muffled groans of agony. This is how Napoleon spent the dawn hours before what would become his final battle. The scene that unfolds as Napoleon's valets help him dress reveals the full extent of his physical deterioration. The man who once leaped onto horseback in full military regalia now requires assistance to pull on his boots. His legs shake with weakness as servants steady him against the bedroom furniture. The famous gray overcoat hangs loose on his diminished frame, tailored for an emperor whose body has begun its final rebellion. When he finally emerges from his quarters, the delay has cost him precious hours of morning preparation. Eyewitness accounts from that morning paint a disturbing portrait of physical incapacity masquerading as imperial command. Napoleon approaches his horse with the measured steps of an invalid, rather than the confident stride of Europe's greatest military tactician. Two officers position themselves on either side as he attempts to mount, their hands ready to catch him if his strength fails completely. The emperor, who once rode across battlefields for 18 hours straight, now struggles with the simple act of getting into his saddle. The hemorrhoids that plagued Napoleon likely diminished his ability to conduct effective battlefield command. Unable to sit comfortably on horseback, he cannot conduct his traditional pre-battle reconnaissance. The emperor, who built his reputation on personally surveying terrain before each engagement, now relies on second-hand reports from subordinates. His famous ability to spot weaknesses in enemy positions from horseback becomes impossible when every movement sends waves of pain through his body. The physical agony clouds his judgment at precisely the moment when clarity matters most. His urinary problems compound the morning's delays in ways that military historians have largely ignored. Napoleon requires frequent breaks that disrupt the flow of battle preparations. Officers grow restless as their commander disappears repeatedly into makeshift private areas, his face gray with pain and embarrassment. The emperor, who once controlled his bodily functions with iron discipline, now finds himself at the mercy of a failing digestive system that refuses to cooperate with imperial scheduling. The laudanum and other opiates in use that day may have further clouded his judgment and physical capabilities. His personal physician administers doses that would render most men unconscious, yet Napoleon demands more to function through the pain. The opiate brings temporary relief but transforms his legendary mental sharpness into a fog of confused decision-making. Witnesses observe him staring blankly at battle maps, his responses delayed and sometimes inappropriate to the tactical situation unfolding before him. The drug that allows him to ride also robs him of the cognitive precision that made him unbeatable. Napoleon's physical limitations manifest in tactical errors that historians debate contributed to his defeat. His inability to mount reconnaissance missions means he misses Wellington's defensive preparations on the ridge. The pain medication affects his timing, leading to delays in coordinating attacks between his various corps commanders. When Marshal Ney requests permission to commit the cavalry reserves, Napoleon's response comes hours late, after the optimal moment has passed. His body's rebellion against imperial authority creates a cascade of missed opportunities and tactical confusion. The moment arrives when Napoleon's physical collapse becomes undeniable even to his most loyal supporters. During the afternoon assault, witnesses observe him slumping forward in his saddle, gripping the pommel to prevent himself from falling. His face takes on a waxy pallor that frightens nearby officers. The emperor, who inspired armies through personal example, now presents the image of a sick man clinging to consciousness through sheer force of will. The psychological impact on French troops who witness their leader's obvious distress cannot be measured, but certainly contributes to the spreading panic. His inner circle watches the disaster unfold while maintaining their protective silence. Marshal Soult recognizes the signs of Napoleon's medical episodes but dares not voice concerns that might undermine imperial authority. General Bertrand observes his master's confusion during crucial tactical discussions, yet continues to relay orders without question. These men understand that admitting Napoleon's incapacity would mean acknowledging the empire's fundamental weakness. Their loyalty becomes complicity in a deception that costs thousands of lives. The retreat from Waterloo reveals the full extent of Napoleon's physical deterioration. Unable to ride effectively, he abandons his carriage multiple times to stumble into roadside ditches, vomiting the meager contents of his stomach onto Belgian soil. His escorts form a protective barrier around their emperor as he experiences dry heaves that convulse his entire body. The man who once outran pursuing armies now moves at the pace of an invalid fleeing for his life. Following his abdication at Fontainebleau, Napoleon's body finally surrenders to the accumulated damage of years. The collapse comes in waves, violent vomiting episodes that produce blood and bile, weakness so complete that he cannot lift his arms without assistance, and a despair so profound that witnesses fear for his mental stability. His physicians hover uselessly as their patient's body systematically shuts down major functions. The medications that sustained him through Waterloo no longer provide even temporary relief. The journey to St. Helena begins with Napoleon, already medically fragile, though no one possesses the courage to voice this diagnosis aloud. His servants pack medications in quantities that suggest a long-term patient, rather than a temporary exile. The emperor's personal effects include chamber pots, laudanum supplies, and special cushions designed to ease the pressure on his hemorrhoids. These preparations acknowledge a medical reality that official records continue to deny. What awaits him on that remote island will transform this medical fragility into something far more sinister. Prison Island Hell. October 15, 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte steps onto the rocky shores of St. Helena and sees his future written in the landscape before him. The island rises from the South Atlantic like a fortress of volcanic rock, surrounded by waters so violent that escape becomes impossible even in imagination. After 23 days at sea, the former emperor faces the reality that this remote speck of British territory will become his tomb. The journey itself stripped away the last pretenses of imperial dignity, but nothing prepared him for the sight of Longwood House. Imagine walking through the front door of what the British call suitable accommodation for Europe's fallen emperor. The building sits exposed on a windswept plateau, constructed from materials that rot in the constant humidity. Moisture seeps through walls built without proper foundations, creating an atmosphere that breeds disease in every corner. The rooms smell of mold and decay before Napoleon even moves in. Rats scurry through passages that connect chambers barely large enough for a merchant's family, let alone an imperial household. The accommodations and Governor Lowe's restrictions, whether neglect or deliberate humiliation, worsened Napoleon's health from the moment he arrived. The dampness attacks Napoleon's already weakened body with relentless efficiency. Water condenses on walls throughout the night, creating pools that never fully dry. His clothing absorbs moisture from the air until even dry garments feel sodden against his skin. The humidity makes breathing difficult for a man whose lungs already struggle with the effects of his mysterious illness. Each morning brings the discovery of new mold growth on furniture, books, and personal belongings. The climate becomes another enemy in the campaign to destroy whatever remains of imperial dignity. St. Helena's oppressive heat compounds the moisture problem in ways that torture Napoleon's deteriorating constitution. The tropical sun beats down on Longwood's inadequate roof, turning the interior into a furnace by midday. His servants struggle to create comfortable spaces in rooms that trap heat like ovens. The combination of humidity and temperature creates conditions that would challenge healthy men, but for Napoleon's failing body, the climate becomes a daily assault on his remaining strength. Sweat mixes with the constant dampness, creating an environment where clean clothes become impossible to maintain. The food that reaches Napoleon's table accelerates his physical decline through genuine scarcity and poor quality provisions. Reports from his household describe thick stews made from spoiled meat that often end meals in violent gagging episodes. The British authorities restrict his diet to provisions that would embarrass a country inn, serving cheap wine that burns his already inflamed stomach. Fresh vegetables become rare luxuries on an island where Napoleon once commanded the finest chefs in Europe. His body, already ravaged by internal disease, receives no nutritional support to fight the progression of his illness. Watch how confinement destroys a mind built for continental conquest. Napoleon paces the limited grounds of Longwood like a caged animal, his movements restricted by British guards who monitor every step beyond his prison's boundaries. The man who once dictated terms to kings now requires permission to walk more than a few hundred yards from his quarters. His famous energy, already diminished by illness, turns inward and becomes obsessive rewriting of his military campaigns. He spends hours correcting historical accounts while his body wastes away in the humid prison that masquerades as exile accommodation. Governor Hudson Lowe transforms petty bureaucratic power into systematic torment through restrictions that contemporaries recorded as political tensions. The British official enforces limitations on visitors and correspondence that serve questionable security purposes. Napoleon's requests for basic improvements to his living conditions meet with delays and refusals that demonstrate official indifference to his suffering. Lowe's restrictions include requirements that Napoleon submit to being addressed by his birth name rather than his imperial title, a psychological assault that continues daily throughout his imprisonment. These petty humiliations compound the physical deterioration already underway. The sanitation at Longwood House creates breeding grounds for disease that accelerate Napoleon's decline beyond what his internal illness alone could accomplish. Waste disposal systems fail regularly, creating unsanitary conditions that would shock visitors to even modest European homes. The servants struggle with inadequate facilities that make basic hygiene nearly impossible to maintain. Chamber pots overflow, drains back up, and cleaning supplies remain chronically short. These conditions breed bacteria and parasites that attack Napoleon's already compromised immune system, creating a cascade of secondary infections that compound his primary illness. His loyal followers witness the systematic destruction of their former emperor while maintaining the fiction that exile represents temporary setback rather than death sentence. Count Bertrand watches Napoleon's daily struggles with bathroom functions while pretending not to notice the blood that increasingly appears in waste basins. Dr. Barry O'Meara documents symptoms that clearly indicate terminal illness while officially reporting minor digestive complaints to British authorities, minimizing alarm in his communications with London. These men maintain dignity through denial, protecting Napoleon's privacy while secretly documenting the evidence of his approaching death. The contrast between imperial palaces and this prison becomes a daily reminder of how completely power can evaporate. Napoleon once held court in rooms where every surface gleamed with gold leaf and priceless artworks. His former bedchambers featured silk hangings and furniture crafted by Europe's master artisans. Now he sleeps in a damp room where wallpaper peels from moisture damage and furniture falls apart from the constant humidity. The man who signed treaties in halls lined with mirrors and crystal chandeliers now conducts his final correspondence at a wooden table that wobbles on uneven floorboards. The island prison accomplishes what no army could achieve through direct confrontation. Where military campaigns failed to destroy Napoleon, St. Helena succeeds through patient attrition that wears away his remaining strength day by day. Those conditions accelerated the disease already eating at him. The body rebels. By 1816, Napoleon's body launches its final assault against whatever remains of imperial dignity. Imagine waking each morning to violent retching that brings up nothing but bile and blood. This becomes Napoleon's new reality as his stomach repeatedly rejects nourishment in episodes that leave him gasping and weak. His servants position basins around his bed like medical equipment, knowing that each convulsion will echo through Longwood House with sounds that offer no relief. Between episodes, he lies motionless, too exhausted to acknowledge the worried faces hovering around his bedside. His legendary appetite vanishes so completely that even water becomes an enemy. The throat that once delivered commands to marshals now closes against liquids his body desperately needs, creating a cycle of dehydration that leaves his skin dry and his eyes sunken. His digestive system has begun systematic rebellion, refusing to cooperate with the basic function of keeping him alive. Napoleon watches helplessly as servants offer different foods, each attempt ending in the same violent rejection. The abdominal swelling transforms his torso into something alien and disturbing. His belly distends outward like a woman in advanced pregnancy, the skin stretched tight over whatever mass grows beneath. The distension pushes against his ribs and makes breathing shallow and labored, while the constant pressure makes sitting unbearable and lying down nearly impossible. His servants must help him navigate doorways sideways because his expanded abdomen no longer fits through spaces designed for normal human proportions. His skin takes on the sickly gray-green hue of approaching death. The healthy complexion that once radiated imperial authority fades to a waxy, translucent color that alarms everyone who sees him. Veins become visible beneath skin that looks like old parchment, while the unnatural pallor makes his eyes appear to sink deeper into their sockets, creating a skull-like appearance that frightens visitors. His servants learn to avoid looking directly at his face during daily duties, disturbed by the visible evidence of internal decay. Documented treatments from his physicians likely worsened his condition rather than providing relief. Medical records show doctors applied leeches to drain what they believed was excess blood, administered calomel as a mercurial purgative that probably poisoned his already failing system, and increased laudanum doses that clouded his judgment while offering only temporary pain relief. These interventions, standard for the era, attacked his weakened body with additional toxins when he needed gentle care. His bowel functions become a source of daily torment that strips away personal privacy. Constipation locks his system for days, causing excruciating pain as waste accumulates in blocked intestines. When relief finally comes, it arrives as bloody diarrhea that stains everything it touches. The cycle repeats endlessly, painful blockage followed by violent release that leaves him weak and humiliated. His servants must clean up the evidence while pretending not to notice their former emperor's shame. Fluid retention turns his legs into swollen cylinders that bear no resemblance to the limbs that once carried him across European battlefields. The edema begins at his ankles and creeps upward, creating tight, painful swelling that makes walking nearly impossible. His skin stretches to accommodate the excess fluid, becoming shiny and tender to the touch. When pressed, his flesh holds the indentation like wet clay, evidence of water that his failing kidneys can no longer process effectively. Night becomes a battlefield where sleep offers no escape from physical torment. Sweat soak through his night clothes within hours, requiring multiple changes of bedding before dawn. The moisture carries the sick smell of his failing body, creating an atmosphere that makes the bedroom feel like a hospital ward. His servants work in shifts to maintain dry linens, but the sweats return faster than they can manage the laundry. The constant dampness chills him even in St. Helena's tropical climate, making him shiver while simultaneously burning with fever. Morning routines that once required minutes now consume hours of careful assistance. Dressing becomes an elaborate process involving multiple servants who must support his weight while maneuvering clothing around his distended abdomen and swollen limbs. His arms lack the strength to lift themselves above shoulder height, making simple tasks like pulling on shirts impossible without help. Buttons become insurmountable obstacles for fingers that shake with weakness and pain. The realization dawns slowly but inevitably. His body has begun the systematic shutdown that precedes death. Each organ system fails in sequence, creating a cascade of dysfunction that no amount of imperial willpower can reverse. His kidneys struggle to process waste, his liver can no longer filter toxins effectively, and his digestive system rejects all attempts at nourishment. Napoleon watches this process with the detached fascination of a general observing enemy troop movements, understanding the tactical situation even as he becomes powerless to influence the outcome. His moments of clarity become precious intervals between waves of physical agony and medication-induced confusion. During these brief periods, Napoleon acknowledges what his servants dare not voice. His body has abandoned him completely. The flesh that carried him from Corsican obscurity to European domination now works against him with methodical efficiency. These changes made basic tasks, dressing, sitting, breathing, slowly impossible, while something far more disturbing began to manifest in the very air around him. The stench of decay. The putrid odor that now defines Napoleon's existence carries with it the unmistakable scent of flesh beginning to rot while still attached to a living body. By 1817, the smell announces his presence before he enters a room, combining vomit, damp wool, and something far worse that permeates every surface at Longwood House. His servants learn to breathe through their mouths when approaching his chambers, but even this defensive measure fails against the assault on their senses. The stench seeps into wallpaper, furniture, and clothing with a persistence that defies all attempts at removal. Imagine walking through the corridors of Longwood House during this period. The smell hits you long before you reach Napoleon's door, a wave of putrefaction that makes visitors stop in their tracks. The odor carries the sweet, cloying scent of decay mixed with the sharp bite of stomach acid and bile. It clings to fabric and follows people as they move through the house, contaminating other rooms with its presence. Guests who come to pay their respects find themselves making excuses to cut visits short, unable to endure the olfactory assault that surrounds the dying emperor. His servants face an impossible battle against the advancing stench. They open every window in his quarters, even during St. Helena's coldest weather, desperately trying to create airflow that might carry away some of the overwhelming odor. The wind brings temporary relief, but within minutes of closing the windows, the smell returns with renewed intensity. Fresh air becomes a luxury that Napoleon's household craves but can never maintain for long. According to household testimony, servants develop a rotation system, spelling each other in short shifts because longer exposure to the concentrated stench makes them physically ill. The rotting flesh smell attaches itself to Napoleon's clothing with supernatural tenacity. His garments, freshly laundered each morning, absorb the odor of decay within hours of being worn. His bedding requires constant changing, but even newly cleaned linens become saturated with the smell overnight. The imperial wardrobe that once represented power and dignity now serves as a collection of contaminated fabric that spreads the stench throughout his living quarters. Laundry becomes a daily ordeal for servants who must handle clothing that reeks of death and decomposition. Napoleon's breath becomes a weapon of isolation that drives people away from close conversation. The foul air that emerges when he speaks carries the concentrated essence of internal decay, a mixture of rotting tissue and digestive acids that makes listeners instinctively step backward. His attempts at normal discourse become exercises in endurance for anyone within speaking distance. Even his most loyal followers find themselves unconsciously moving away during conversations, their bodies reacting to the smell before their minds can override the response. The emperor, who once commanded attention through charisma, now clears rooms through the simple act of speaking. The black bile that Napoleon vomits creates permanent stains that resist all cleaning attempts. The dark liquid splashes across his nightclothes, bedding, and furniture, leaving marks that serve as visible reminders of his internal destruction. The bile carries its own distinctive odor, metallic and acidic, that adds another layer to the complex bouquet of decay surrounding him. Servants scrub frantically at the stains, but the bile seems to bond with fabric and wood at a molecular level, creating permanent evidence of his body's revolt against itself. Medical observers later attributed the smell to gases and volatile compounds released by internal bleeding and tissue breakdown. Napoleon's stomach cancer creates internal bleeding that pools and rots inside his body cavity, releasing gases that permeate his entire system. The breakdown of cellular structures produces chemical compounds that escape through his breath, sweat, and waste products. His body becomes a factory of putrefaction, manufacturing the smell of death while he still lives. His bodily waste reaches levels of toxicity that force protective measures recorded in household accounts. Chamber pot duty becomes a test of loyalty that pushes human endurance to its limits. Servants tie cloth strips soaked in vinegar or herbs around their noses and mouths, creating makeshift masks that provide minimal protection against the overwhelming stench. The smell that rises from his waste products carries the concentrated essence of internal organ failure, a biological warning signal that something fundamental has gone wrong inside the emperor's body. The progression from mere sickness to this overwhelming putrid presence creates a timeline of olfactory horror that marks Napoleon's descent toward death. What begins as the typical smell of illness, sour and unpleasant but manageable, evolves into something far more sinister. The advanced internal decay creates a putrid odor that seems to foretell the corpse he will soon become. The smell becomes so concentrated that it seems to have physical weight, pressing down on anyone who enters his presence like a suffocating blanket of putrefaction. Even Count Bertrand and Dr. O'Meara, Napoleon's most devoted companions, struggled to remain in the same room during his worst episodes. These men who followed him into exile find themselves making excuses to step outside for fresh air, their loyalty tested by the biological reality of advanced disease. They return to his bedside with expressions of determination that barely mask their physical revulsion. Their dedication becomes a form of martyrdom, sacrificing their own comfort to maintain vigil over their dying emperor. The horrifying realization settles over his household like a funeral shroud. Napoleon Bonaparte is literally rotting from the inside out. The emperor who once filled palaces with his presence now fills rooms with the stench of his own decay. His flesh rebels so completely that decomposition begins before death, creating a living preview of the corpse he will soon become. The smell drives people away, isolating him in ways that affect not only his physical care but his entire relationship with the world around him. Mind in ruin. As Napoleon's physical condition deteriorates, his mental faculties begin their own parallel descent into darkness. By 1818, the emperor who once commanded Europe with surgical precision now struggles to complete basic thoughts without losing his way mid-sentence. Disease progression, fever, and the medications he takes, laudanum and mercury treatments, all likely contribute to the transformation of the tactical genius into a confused invalid. The man who memorized troop positions across entire continents now forgets the names of servants who have attended him for years. According to household testimony, Napoleon develops documented behaviors that reveal his growing paranoia about poisoning. He demands that every meal be tested in his presence before he will consider eating, watching with intense scrutiny as his servants taste each spoonful of soup and piece of bread. The emperor refuses to drink from any cup except his personal set, convinced that death lurks in every vessel that touches his lips. This constant vigilance exhausts his remaining mental energy while providing no actual protection against the disease that destroys him from within. His moods swing between extremes that terrify even his most devoted companions. Napoleon erupts into volcanic rages over trivial incidents: a misplaced book, a servant who arrives seconds late, the sound of footsteps in adjacent rooms. His face contorts with fury as he screams at imagined slights and perceived conspiracies. These explosions of anger give way to periods of profound depression where he sits motionless for hours, staring at walls with dead eyes that see nothing. Count Bertrand learns to recognize the warning signs, clearing rooms when Napoleon's expression shifts from confusion to potential violence. The cognitive failures follow a devastating sequence: memory loss, spatial confusion, hallucinations, and nightmares that strip away his sense of identity. Napoleon struggles to remember the names of battles he won, the faces of marshals who served under him, even basic facts about his own campaigns. He becomes lost in his own bedroom at Longwood House, wandering in circles while searching for doors he has used thousands of times. Most disturbing, he holds conversations with absent people, addressing empty chairs as if they contain visiting dignitaries or military advisors, issuing orders to phantom subordinates who exist only in his failing mind. These symptoms were observed and documented by his loyal attendants, Count Bertrand, Dr. O'Meara, and others who maintained vigil over their dying emperor. They watched helplessly as their former commander conducted elaborate discussions with invisible participants, his voice rising and falling in response to conversations only he could hear. The man who once inspired armies through personal example now required protection from his own confused perceptions of reality. Night brings no peace to Napoleon's tormented consciousness. His sleep fills with screams that echo through Longwood House, terrifying sounds that wake everyone within hearing distance. The nightmares transport him back to battlefields where he relives victories and defeats with equal intensity. He shouts tactical orders in his sleep, calling for cavalry charges and artillery barrages against dream enemies who attack with supernatural persistence. His servants learn to approach his bed cautiously during these episodes, as he sometimes strikes out at perceived attackers who exist only in his nightmare landscape. The medications prescribed to manage his physical pain create additional layers of mental confusion that compound his cognitive decline. Laudanum doses that would render normal men unconscious barely touch Napoleon's agony, but they cloud his judgment and distort his perception of reality. The opium creates a fog that settles over his thoughts, making simple decisions impossible and complex reasoning utterly beyond his diminished capabilities. His doctors face an impossible choice between managing his physical suffering and preserving whatever remains of his mental function. Pain becomes another enemy that attacks his consciousness from within. The constant agony in his abdomen disrupts his ability to concentrate on anything beyond the immediate sensation of suffering. His thoughts fragment under the assault of chronic pain, breaking apart like glass under pressure. The emperor, who once planned campaigns while managing multiple diplomatic crises simultaneously, now struggles to follow simple conversations when waves of stomach pain crash over his awareness. Brief moments of clarity pierce through the fog of confusion and medication, offering heartbreaking glimpses of the man Napoleon once was. During these intervals, his eyes regain their former sharpness and his voice recovers traces of imperial authority. He speaks with temporary coherence about his past achievements, his strategic insights returning like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. These episodes last only minutes before the fog descends again, but they remind his companions of the brilliant mind that disease and drugs are systematically destroying. His servants witness the tragedy of watching two deaths unfold simultaneously, the body's physical collapse and the mind's psychological disintegration. They see their former emperor reduced to a confused invalid who requires assistance with basic functions, while occasionally displaying flashes of the genius that once conquered Europe. The man who crowned himself emperor now struggles to remember why he wears a crown at all. His mind unraveled even as his organs failed, creating a parallel process of destruction that stripped away every aspect of imperial identity. The emperor's consciousness fragments and dissolves, racing his body toward a final confrontation that would soon demand everything he had left. The Final Agony. March 1821 arrives with Napoleon trapped in a body that has become his enemy's most effective weapon. According to eyewitness accounts recorded by his attendants and physicians, the vomiting episodes that once provided brief respites now continue for hours without interruption. Blood and black bile pour from his mouth in streams that stain his nightclothes and bedding beyond any hope of cleaning. The dark liquid carries the metallic smell of internal bleeding mixed with the putrid odor of decomposing tissue. His servants position multiple basins around his bed, but they cannot keep pace with the constant flow of bodily fluids that signal his approaching death. His abdomen swells to proportions that defy natural explanation. The distension stretches his skin until it becomes translucent and shiny, revealing the network of veins beneath the surface. The swelling creates such pressure that his servants fear his belly might actually burst from internal tension. When they help him change positions, his abdomen feels hard as stone beneath their hands, as if something solid has replaced his normal organs. The grotesque enlargement makes breathing difficult and sitting impossible, forcing him to spend his final weeks in positions that provide no comfort or relief. Fever consumes what remains of Napoleon's consciousness with relentless intensity. His temperature rises to levels that leave him delirious for days at a time, his mind wandering through landscapes that exist only in his damaged brain. He speaks to invisible visitors and issues orders to phantom armies, while his body burns with heat that makes his skin painful to touch. The fever creates hallucinations so vivid that he becomes agitated when his servants fail to acknowledge the important guests he believes fill his room. During brief moments when the fever breaks, he stares at his companions with confusion, unable to understand where he is or why they look so frightened. His body's final rebellion strips away every pretense of imperial dignity through the complete failure of basic functions. Napoleon can no longer control his bowels or bladder, creating messes that his servants must clean multiple times each day. The man who once commanded the bathroom schedules of entire royal courts now soils himself without warning or awareness. His waste products carry the concentrated stench of internal organ failure, adding another layer to the overwhelming smell of decay that surrounds his deathbed. The emperor who signed treaties with kings now requires assistance with the most basic human functions. Breathing becomes a conscious struggle that demands his complete attention during the few moments when fever allows him clarity. His lungs fill with fluid that creates a drowning sensation even while lying in bed. Each breath produces a wet rattling sound that echoes through his chest cavity, audible to anyone standing near his bedside. The fluid accumulation forces him to sleep propped upright against multiple pillows, but even this position provides little relief from the sensation of suffocating. His gasps become shorter and more desperate as his respiratory system joins the systematic shutdown of his other vital organs. The symptoms that torment Napoleon's final days reflect the massive internal destruction that has consumed his body for years. What would later be revealed as a massive stomach tumor, extensive internal bleeding, and multi-organ involvement creates the cascade of failures his attendants witness. The fluid retention causing respiratory distress, the fever from widespread infection, the seizures from systemic toxicity. His body fights a losing battle against cellular rebellion that is spread far beyond its original boundaries. His servants witness convulsions that rack Napoleon's wasted frame with violent spasms beyond his control. The seizures twist his limbs into unnatural positions while his eyes roll back to show only white. His hands, which once signed documents that reshaped Europe, now clench into fists that beat against his chest, and betting without purpose or awareness. The convulsions alternate with periods of complete stillness where he appears dead except for the shallow movement of his chest. These episodes terrorize his loyal companions, who watch helplessly as their former emperor's body destroys itself through systematic rebellion. His skin undergoes a transformation that announces death's arrival even while his heart continues beating. The gray-green pallor that marked his illness for months deepens to the color of old parchment, then progresses to the waxy appearance of a corpse. His extremities turn cold and begin to mottle with dark patches that spread up his arms and legs. The process creates a visual timeline of dying that his servants observe with fascinated horror. They watch their emperor's flesh change color and temperature, while his breath still fogs mirrors held close to his face. Napoleon's hands tremble constantly during these final days, even when he appears unconscious. The shaking starts in his fingers and spreads up his arms, creating a palsy that never stops throughout his waking and sleeping hours. His servants must hold cups to his lips because his hands shake too violently to manage even this simple task. The trembling represents his nervous system's final protest against the cascade of organ failures that consume his remaining strength. May 5, 1821 brings the moment when Europe's conqueror faces the one enemy no strategy can defeat. Napoleon's breathing becomes so labored that each exhalation sounds like his last, followed by long pauses that make his companions lean forward to check for signs of life. His pulse weakens to the point where it becomes nearly impossible to detect, fluttering beneath skin that feels cold and clammy to the touch. The man who once commanded millions cannot command his own heart to continue beating. The moment arrives when Napoleon's remaining awareness recognizes the inevitability of death approaching. Through the fog of fever and medication, he understands that his body has reached the point where no imperial decree can command it to continue functioning. He asked for last rites, gave a faint sign, and then died on the evening of May 5, 1821. Death's brutal revelation. The silence that follows Napoleon's final breath lasts only minutes before the grim business of medical examination begins. Dr. Francesco Annamarchi, Napoleon's personal physician, prepares to perform the autopsy that will reveal what killed Europe's most feared conqueror. British physicians join the procedure, their presence ensuring that official records will document whatever horrors lie beneath the emperor's bloated skin. The decision to open Napoleon's body stems from both medical curiosity and political necessity. The world demands to know what force finally defeated the man who seemed invincible. Imagine the scene as these physicians prepare their instruments for the gruesome task ahead. The autopsy room fills with the concentrated stench of decay that has surrounded Napoleon for months, but now intensifies beyond human endurance. The doctors keep their surgical tools submerged in buckets of wine between cuts, hoping the alcohol will provide some protection against the overwhelming smell of rotting flesh. The examining physicians record extensive internal destruction and strong odors that make work difficult, forcing them to step back and breathe through cloths soaked in wine. The first incisions reveal the scope of internal devastation that consumed Napoleon during his final years. His abdominal cavity opens to expose organs that bear no resemblance to normal human anatomy. The physicians work in methodical silence as they catalog damage that exceeds their expectations. Each cut releases new waves of putrid gas that force them to step back and breathe through cloths soaked in wine. The emperor's body has become a chamber of horrors that challenges their professional composure and medical training. Napoleon's stomach emerges from his body cavity as a grotesque parody of the organ that once processed imperial feasts. The physicians lift it carefully from the surrounding tissue, revealing an interior surface that appears blackened and partially rotted. Cancer has consumed the stomach wall so completely that large sections simply disintegrate when touched. The organ that should have nourished Europe's greatest military genius instead became the instrument of his prolonged torture. The doctors placed the destroyed stomach in a bowl of alcohol, preserving the evidence of years of internal agony. The massive tumor that killed Napoleon becomes visible as the autopsy progresses, a malignant growth that had consumed him from within like a parasitic empire. The cancerous mass stretches across multiple organ systems, its tentacles reaching into areas that explain the emperor's diverse symptoms during his final years. The tumor size reveals that Napoleon had been carrying this death sentence inside his body for much longer than anyone suspected. The growth represents years of cellular rebellion that no imperial decree could suppress. The examination reveals that Napoleon's suffering extended far beyond his cancerous stomach into multiple organ systems that had begun their own processes of failure. His liver shows signs of serious disease, explaining the yellow coloration that marked his skin during his final months. The intestines bear evidence of chronic inflammation that caused the bloody diarrhea that tormented his last years. Each organ tells part of the story of systematic breakdown that transformed a powerful emperor into a dying invalid who could not control his most basic bodily functions. The stench that fills the autopsy room becomes so overwhelming that Napoleon's personal valet, Marchand, refuses to approach the examination table. The smell combines the sweet odor of advanced decomposition with the acidic bite of diseased tissue and the metallic scent of internal bleeding. The physicians must work in shifts, stepping outside for fresh air when the concentrated smell of death becomes unbearable. Windows remain open despite the tropical heat, but even constant ventilation cannot clear the air of the overwhelming odor that Napoleon's corpse releases. The autopsy recorded a stomach almost destroyed by ulceration and a massive tumor. The official cause recorded was stomach cancer. Rumors of arsenic poisoning arose immediately, but they remain unproven and contested. The internal damage explains his years of vomiting blood, the abdominal swelling that made him appear pregnant, and the constant pain that required dangerous doses of laudanum for temporary relief. The physicians document evidence of prolonged agony that no amount of imperial willpower could overcome. Additional discoveries emerge as the examination continues, revealing the comprehensive nature of Napoleon's physical breakdown. His kidneys show damage consistent with the fluid retention that swelled his legs beyond recognition. His heart displays signs of strain from years of fighting the systemic effects of cancer and organ failure. The autopsy becomes a catalog of biological disasters that individually would have challenged any human body, but collectively created an impossible burden that even Napoleon's legendary determination could not overcome. The medical evidence accumulates into an undeniable conclusion that Napoleon had been dying for years while maintaining the illusion of imperial strength. The tumor's advanced state suggests that cancer began consuming him during his most successful military campaigns, possibly explaining tactical errors that cost him crucial victories. The physicians realize they are examining a man who conquered Europe while his own body waged a more successful war against him. The autopsy proves that death stalked Napoleon through his greatest triumphs, waiting patiently for the moment when his failing flesh would finally surrender. The autopsy supported the stomach cancer diagnosis as the proximate cause, while also documenting widespread organ damage consistent with years of bleeding, infection, and treatment harm. The examination concludes with the stark realization that Napoleon's death represents the ultimate victory of human mortality over imperial pretension. The man who crowned himself emperor died from the same biological processes that claim every human life, reduced to rotting tissue that would soon present his attendants with one final degrading challenge: the corpse of an emperor. The preparation of Napoleon's corpse becomes an immediate crisis for his attendants. Within hours of his final breath, the body begins accelerating its decay in St. Helena's humid climate, forcing his servants to confront the grim task of preparing remains that continue to bloat and distort. The abdomen that swelled during his final weeks now hardens to stone-like consistency, making it nearly impossible to position the corpse in any natural arrangement. His flesh takes on the waxy appearance of old candles, with skin that feels cold and clammy beneath their trembling hands. The struggle to dress Napoleon's decomposing remains becomes a nightmare of logistics and revulsion. His bloated torso will not fit into any of his remaining uniforms, forcing his servants to cut fabric and improvise clothing that can accommodate the grotesque swelling. They work quickly, desperate to complete their duties before the tropical heat accelerates decomposition beyond manageable levels. Each movement releases new waves of putrid gas from the corpse, creating an atmosphere so toxic that the servants must work in brief shifts to avoid becoming physically ill. Picture the horror of those who knew Napoleon in life as they confront his transformed features. The face that once commanded respect from kings and generals now appears as a distorted mask that bears little resemblance to the living emperor. Swelling has pushed his features into unnatural proportions, with eyes that bulge from their sockets and cheeks that sag with accumulated fluid. The proud profile captured in marble busts has vanished beneath layers of bloated tissue that make identification challenging even for his closest companions. The British authorities recognize that time works against any attempt at dignified burial proceedings. Rapid decomposition in St. Helena's climate makes delay impossible without risking complete breakdown of the corpse. They hastily arrange for a simple wooden coffin, while Napoleon's French attendants line it with tin in a desperate attempt to contain the overwhelming smell of decay. The burial preparations proceed with unseemly haste, driven by biological necessity rather than imperial protocol. For 4 days, the wrapped body awaits burial while officials debate procedures and make arrangements that reflect political tensions rather than respect for the deceased. The funeral ceremony itself becomes an endurance test for all who attend. Witnesses describe air so foul that breathing through cloth provides minimal relief from the assault on their senses. The rancid atmosphere clings to clothing and hair, following mourners long after they leave the burial site. Some attendees position themselves upwind from the grave, while others simply hold their breath during the brief religious service. The British deny requests for naval honors and other military courtesies, reducing the ceremony to a basic burial that strips away any acknowledgement of Napoleon's former status. Napoleon's final resting place reflects none of the grandeur that marked his imperial reign. The gravesite in the Valley of the Granium offers only a simple depression in foreign soil, covered by a plain stone that bears no inscription identifying its occupant. The British governor insists on leaving the marker blank, denying Napoleon even the basic dignity of his name carved in stone. This anonymous grave represents the complete erasure of imperial identity, reducing Europe's former master to an unnamed corpse beneath a willow tree. The speed of decomposition strips away the last vestiges of physical majesty that once defined Napoleon's earthly presence. Within days of burial, the tropical climate and humidity begin breaking down whatever remains of the emperor's flesh. The body that carried him from Corsican obscurity to European domination now feeds the organisms of St. Helena's soil. His physical form dissolves into the earth with the same efficiency that once marked his military campaigns, leaving no trace of the power that once reshaped an entire continent. Imagine the contrast between Napoleon's magnificent coronation in Notre Dame and this pathetic burial on a remote island. The ceremony where he crowned himself emperor featured golden robes, precious jewels, and the assembled nobility of France witnessing his assumption of divine authority. The burial service offers only a handful of mourners, a plain wooden box, and air so corrupted by decay that participants struggle to remain present for the brief ritual. The transformation from imperial splendor to anonymous grave represents one of history's most dramatic reversals of fortune. Guards patrol the perimeter of the burial site, not to honor the deceased emperor, but to prevent curiosity seekers from witnessing the undignified spectacle of his interment. The British authorities understand that Napoleon's pathetic end might inspire sympathy rather than satisfaction among those who observe the ceremony. They work to conceal the reality that Europe's former conqueror has been reduced to decomposing remains that offend the senses of all who approach his grave. The final irony emerges as Napoleon's burial proceeds without ceremony or recognition. The child he fought to legitimize and the crown he reshaped to secure his dynasty both vanish faster than his name could be carved into a gravestone. His political legacy crumbles with the same speed that bacteria consume his physical remains, leaving nothing but anonymous bones beneath foreign soil. The emperor who crowned himself now lies exposed and stitched shut, his body become a swollen mass riddled with tumors, dissected by foreign surgeons, and buried far from the France he claimed to embody. The flesh that once housed imperial ambition feeds the earth of a prison island, completing the transformation from conqueror to rapidly decomposing remains. The man who remade Europe was buried anonymously on a remote island, his death revealing truths that no amount of imperial propaganda could conceal. Conclusions: this grotesque end stripped away imperial myth to reveal a basic human truth: disease and time spare no one. The man who crowned himself emperor died in agony, his body bloated beyond recognition, consumed by tumors that no crown could command away. His final moments expose the biological reality that kings and peasants share identical fates when cellular rebellion begins. Historians and medical experts continue to debate the exact mix of cancer, potential poisoning, and other factors that ended his life. Yet Napoleon's legacy endures through the Napoleonic Code and administrative reforms that still shape modern Europe. The emperor who reshaped continents could not reshape the cancer eating his stomach, proving that human ambition means nothing to the microscopic forces that govern mortality. If this history unsettled you, subscribe for more episodes exploring history's darker corners, from the Golden Cathedral where Napoleon crowned himself to an anonymous grave beneath a willow tree. Power ends where biology begins.